Tim, it's great having you on the podcast today. We go way back, and before we get started, I just want to make mention a lot of our guests over the last 4 years have been, Floridians, Northeast fly fishermen, saltwater guys. But it's important because the podcast, for what we're known for, is great storytelling and fish stories. So we have to get the great stories from the West and the trout guys. And you're an obvious choice, to be with us here today. We've known each other for a long time. You're the manager of the Taylor Creek store for 24 years, but you've got a big background in fly tying, conservation work, the way you live, you chase the sun, So I guess the first question as we get going here, tell me a little bit about the bigness, the stuff that you've done and what you're most proud of.
Oh gosh, I guess I've been I think instrumental in some of the rules of the Roaring Fork that have been applied. When I first came to the Roaring Fork Valley, the lower fork and allowed 8 fish to be kept. It was not near the fishery then in the late 70s and 80s as it is now by any means. Some of the closures, spawning closures on some of the creeks has come about since then, and that's helped tremendously. And it's hard to say. I was fortunate enough to be the Conservator of the Year from the Roaring Fork Conservancy, and that was a great honor from a great organization.
Yeah, that must have meant a lot to you, right?
Meant a lot, for sure.
When you're fishing and competing and doing stuff in life, you never really try to achieve a Hall of Fame or an honor, a conservation honor like that. So when they call you, it's a big surprise. What did you think when you got that call?
Well, obviously, I was very honored. I mean, it was when Rico from the Roaring Fork Conservancy came over and said, "This is what we would like to do and honor you," and I was obviously very honored. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm. So, were you one of the first drift boat guides in the Lower Fork?
Yes,
you were.
There was one before us, my buddy and I, who started Roaring Fork Anglers, Lars Anderberg, and Rudy Steele was probably the first one that I know that was doing commercial guide trips on the Roaring Fork River and the Colorado River at that time as well.
What year was that?
Oh gosh, he was probably doing that in the late 70s, early 80s, for sure, early 80s, and that's when we got into the drift boat fishing, was in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm. But you think the river now is a better fishing river than it was back then, the fork?
There's no question about it, and for many reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that we had the Mid-Continent mine up on the Crystal River back then, and whenever heavy rains would hit, like they do still to this day, and sometimes put the lower Roaring Fork out of commission because of the mudslides and things like that. Some of the tailing ponds would basically overflow and would get into the river, and it did a tremendous amount of damage to that lower Roaring Fork River.
How about, did it damage the hatches as well, or what kind of damage was it actually doing to the fish themselves?
To the fish themselves, for sure. I've seen it at times when they were doing that, and the fish in the Roaring Fork just below the Crystal would be gulping on the surface, gulping for air on the surface because it was so toxic to them.
Wow.
But they shut those mines down since then.
Oh yeah.
So you don't have that issue anymore.
Don't have that issue anymore.
But it's just muddy water when
muddy water, which certainly affects the guides and the things like that. The fish survive. They're pretty resilient as far as muddy water and things like that. They can survive it. They can handle it pretty well. And the bugs too. I mean, the bugs certainly have become much more prolific, it seems like, since that mine closed down.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. You know what I've noticed though, Tim, As I remember, I told Nikki, is that when I used to drive over the Slaughterhouse Bridge from town up here to where I live, the clouds of elk hair caddises used to be so thick it looked like a snowstorm. I don't see that anymore.
No, you're right. It doesn't seem like we have as many caddis as we used to. That's a fact. But you know what? It seems like we actually have more mayflies, especially in the lower river. You know, we never used to see the mayflies throughout the small mayflies that happen throughout the summer season. You know, the little Betas or blue-wing olive types.
Sure.
You know, that pretty much go all summer long once the big bugs, the PMDs and the drakes are done with. So
That's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I would have thought the bug hatches were going to be much more prolific back in the 80s than today.
well, the caddis were.
Right.
The caddis were. But and for whatever reason, we don't see quite those hatches, just like Andy was saying, that on the rivers, the caddis all the time.
What about the drakes?
Drakes, when you know what, when we first opened the shop down in Glenwood in, you know, the early 80s, we didn't see many drakes. We didn't see many drakes at all.
Were you looking for them? They're unrecognizable?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, because we were out there at the times when there should be drakes. I mean, we caught some fish on some big dry flies, not necessarily drake patterns, huge humpies, you know, red humpies or something like that. Fishing
H&L.
big H&Ls and things like that, but not to where you saw the numbers of drakes that you see today.
It'd be interesting to hear what an entomologist would say about the evolution of of the bug life, right? Because the elk hair caddises are gone, but the drakes are here.
Yes.
Do you still have a drift boat?
Oh, yes.
Do you use it often?
Oh, quite often.
You do.
Yeah.
Do you like fishing out of a boat more than wading?
You know, for where you fish out of a boat, yes, to some degree. I mean, I like the lower Roaring Fork with the drift boat and the Colorado. I enjoy that because those rivers are a little bit more difficult to wade as far as that goes. You know, the middle fork, the upper fork here, and the frying pan and things like that. Though, I mean, those rivers are meant to be waded, and you can take your time and you know approach the fish differently. It's a total different game, and that's why I enjoy it. It is a different game.
I've always loved to, you know, look for one fish. Like we were talking before we got started about fishing irrigation ditches, you know, and they're just there hanging. The water on their right is ripping, you know, with rapids and stuff. These guys are just sipping stuff. And the thing is, it's almost like you can almost like wait for the hatch to start to work or the bugs to start to move. But those fish are always kind of feeding on something, so you always have a game to be played at with those things.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's just a different game.
Yeah.
And it's all, you know, we're fortunate to have so many options here in the Roaring Fork Valley. There's no question about it that we can take advantage of.
When you first started guiding in the Roaring Fork Valley, were there any, you know, anybody you looked up to, anyone you gained knowledge from? Were there like heroes of yours that, you know, you'd aspire to be?
I would say the first drift boat guide on the river, which was Rudy Steele. I mean, I think we looked up to him a lot because he taught us how to row boats. He taught us how to, you know, to approach rivers, and he was just a great guide and a great friend.
And what do you think when you go to the Carbondale boat ramp now and you see 40 trailers?
You know, I think those people are enjoying that river like I enjoyed it way back when. And this is just, it's a testament to the health of that river down there, is that there's, on any given day, there may be 20 or 30 guides down there floating, and they're all having an incredible day. They're all catching some really nice fish.
A testament to a lot of your conservation work.
Well,
could be.
Perhaps.
You have to
and
grab it a little bit, you know.
I will say the last time I floated down there, the moss on the bottom was just so prolific. I mean, it was like 2 feet off the bottom?
Well, there's and
that's just rising temperatures in the water?
I think it's rising temperatures. I think it also has to do with nutrients being put into the waters from golf courses, from farmers and things like that.
Man, it's just the same problem as we have in Florida.
It's just it just creates that moss, and then it goes away in the fall.
Does it?
Yeah, it goes
The
away in
bottom
the fall.
gets pretty clean throughout the winter.
It cleans right back up again. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
Once it starts to get cold, and it seems like, and
I did hear from a fellow guide who knows the river much better than I do that they actually, those trout like the moss. They hang in the moss, and they kind of, their backs become camouflaged in the moss because we have such a bad osprey problem that they're like in there hiding from the ospreys. And I don't know if that's
just like elk from your arrow.
Yeah. I don't know. That might be BS, but
well, you know what? It could be.
You know what it really is? That fish is going to be there regardless of that moss. That's his house. It just so happens to have moss in it because it's summer. He's not consciously thinking, I'm going to hide behind this little string of moss to avoid that.
But if you float down there, the amount of ospreys are insane.
Maybe
they're in every tree, right?
Yeah, a lot.
Maybe
and eagles, and eagles as well. There's quite a few eagles on the way down.
You know what?
Lots of herons.
And even like in the upper fork, when you catch a rainbow, I mean, I would say 1 out of every 4 has a big old hole in it
from Italian or
from
something.
Yeah,
it's not some sort of a
like a lesion.
Like a lesion.
It could be. I don't know, but it looks like a talon or
like a poke hole or something.
Yeah, but anyway,
interesting. Mm-hmm. Well. You don't like the snow, do you?
I loved the snow when I was younger.
Did you ski quite a bit?
Skied quite a bit. Played in the snow a lot when we were raising our daughter, and here, with sledding and skiing and everything like that. But now I don't like the snow near as much.
Yeah, kind of like me. So you had a big life during the winter when you were running the store for those 24 years, right? Yeah. How did you end up living out of 2 RVs, one in Mexico and one in Colorado? When did that thought process come to be like, man, we could have the best in Mazatlan and the best of Colorado?
Oh, we tent camped a lot when we were, my wife and I were younger and raising our daughter and things. And then my wife thought, an RV would be nice. And I'm thinking, well, I enjoy the tent. We don't need an RV.
But she is a woman.
She's a woman. So she calls me up one day, and I was up in Vail at one of the other shops, and she calls me up and says, there's this RV down around Dotsero that I want you to just take a look at. So I took a look at it. It was a small one. It was a little 26-foot RV, and I took a look at it on the way back home, and she says, so I called her up and I says, I think you probably want to come take a look at this. So she took a look at it, and we ended up buying it, and we would go camping in it for a while, and that has a bathroom now, that's the big thing, that's
Sure.
the most comfortable thing, and so we'd go camping in it on the weekends, and then thought, we could live out of this thing. This is pretty nice. It's small, but we don't need much. It was just her and I, and so we did. We ended up doing that, and I, as I told you before, I approached the guys that I work for at Taylor Creek and said, the wintertime is not when you need me the most.
Right.
The summer is when you need me the most. How about if I just take 7 months off in the winter and come back and work 5 months in the summer?
What Bill Fitzsimmons say about that?
No,
one?
that was after Bill.
That was after Bill?
That was after Bill, yeah.
There you go. I'm
not sure.
The Gart brothers are probably a little bit more negotiable than Bill would have been.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how'd you find Mexico? Or you're near Mazatlan? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. We're just south of Mazatlan.
And you drove that RV down there?
Mm-hmm. We did. Because we had some friends that were doing it prior to when we were doing it, but they didn't have any kids. So by the time we raised our daughter and she went to college, then we started to go down there.
Did you start fishing down there right away as well?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm not going to go anywhere if I can't fish.
Yeah. What's the fishing of choice for you down there?
The fishing of choice down there right now for me is largemouth bass. A lot of the reservoirs, municipal water reservoirs for some of the big cities, they've planted Florida strain largemouth bass in, and they manage it as a catch and release, total catch and release lakes. Mm-hmm. And they're wonderful. There's one right now that we've been fishing, and it's about an hour from where we live. So
what's that lake called?
Picachos. Yeah.
What's the lake that you know that where all the really big ones come from?
I forget.
El Salto?
Yeah, El Salto. Yeah.
You ever fished there?
Oh, many times. Yeah.
What's it like fishing there?
It's great. I mean, it's another one of those catch and release type lakes that the Mexican government has decided that that's what they want to do it for sport fishing. There's lodges on both of those lakes, Picachos and El Salto. El Salto is about 2.5 hours from it, so we don't fish it quite.
Is it crowded since it's so popular? With such big fish.
There's a lot of boats, but what we have is little fish cat boats called a Scout that most of us have, and it's a boat. It's a YouTube type of a boat that you can oar. And then when you get to a spot that has cover and things like that, then you just drop your oars and you kick with your fins.
Almost like a belly boat.
It's very similar.
What happens if you have bad weather and big winds and you can't get home?
Well, that's never happened.
Stick your thumb out for a bigger boat and come pick you up.
Actually, it was funny because at El Salto this year there was a group of us, and there was a few guys that were too far away from where we were at, and the wind really came up, and so we sent a boat out for them. But it's really never happened. I mean, we've obviously struggled at times to get back, but we only fish typically maybe 3 miles away from where we launch.
Yeah.
So.
And it's not uncommon to catch multiple 10-pound bass, right, in El Salto?
Well, it's not as common as you think. I mean, you hear about those multiple 10-pound bass. The biggest bass that we catch at Picachos anyway are in the 5 to 7 pound range.
That's still a really nice bass.
Oh, they're terrific, and they're incredibly strong. They're stronger than most of the bass that I've caught anywhere else, and I don't know why, but they are.
Are you a fly fishing purist, or would you ever take a spin rod and go, I'm gonna bang them up today?
with a rubber worm.
I've fished the plastics and stuff like that, the lizards and stuff like that. When we first started, that's how we learned, because we went out with the guides and that's the only way they fished for the most part. But since then, I feel like I can be just as effective with the fly as I can with the plastics.
You have the sinking line and...
Sinking line, heavier flies, with, basically their main food source is gizzard shad. It's not plastic lizards and worms. So, that's what they eat the most. And so we're fishing, shad imitations anywhere from 2 inches to 5 inches long.
Yeah, but I would think with the Power Pro and the braid these days, you can cast a spin rod much farther than you can cast a fly.
Yeah, but you don't need to cast far.
They're everywhere.
You can take your little boats. You can take your little boats back into little bays that are, that the big boats can't get into.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Because the big, they're 16, 18-foot boats, and they can't maneuver back into those little bays and things like that. And you can work it. They work it with their trolling motors. We work it with our fins, and I can work it slower, and I think oftentimes more effectively.
That's crazy, yeah, because here you are 72 and you're still paddling around with a bunch of fins on a lake in Mexico.
Absolutely. One of my best friends is 81 and he's doing it
Is that right?
twice a week with me.
That's awesome.
Isn't that how I read something that's how you came up with your famous streamer fly, the Autumn, what was it? The Autumn Splendor? From a bass? It wasn't.
No, that was on the Roaring Fork.
I know it was on the Roaring Fork, but I thought you were using...
Well, what happened is that I was guiding a gentleman floating down the Roaring Fork, and we were having a slow day, streamer fishing in the fall, having a very slow day. When about halfway through the float, he says, "Do you mind if I use one of my flies?" And he pulls out this like 4-inch long yellow and orange bass fly with eyes, huge eyes on it and stuff like that, and then started casting it out. And he was moving fish, and then fish that we hadn't even seen, throwing our woolly boogers and sculpin imitations and stuff like that. And didn't catch many on it because it was just way oversized and stuff. And so,
but they liked the color and the movement.
They liked the color and the movement and things like that. And so I took that bass fly thought and made it into a smaller version that worked really well for trout.
Interesting. And that's one of the most popular streamers in the West.
Oh, I'm not sure it's the most.
Come on, you got to give it. Yes, it is. That's pretty cool.
It's cool. It's cool that it's stood the test of time, because it was mid '80s when I first tied it.
And then you also tied the BLM.
Yeah, that, which
is
stands for beaded little mayfly.
Beaded little mayfly. How'd you come up with that?
It was just a version, of a little bead that was underneath the wing case, a little bit different than most beads were when they first, everybody was tying bead head flies and stuff like that. And it had a sparkle to it a little bit. It was a crystal flash type body, and wing and tail and legs.
Were you always constantly thinking about how to make different and better flies?
Still am.
Really?
Still am. Every day. That's what keeps me going.
How do you design a fly? Do you get a microscope to look at these bugs, to examine the natural?
Some, but more often it's just observation on the river, being on the water, and trying something different a little bit than what the average fly is that you can buy in the fly shop. That's really it more than anything.
It's kind of like your myces shrimp that you tie, right?
Yeah.
Was that a lot different than the other myces shrimp that are available?
At the time, it was different.
Was it a killer?
At the time, it worked. Yeah, it was great. But then, back then, back in the late '80s, early '90s, mysis shrimp were a huge food source up on the frying pan.
Mm-hmm.
As you probably remember, I mean,
right.
The fish were. I had a biologist tell me one time that those fish, when the mysis shrimp were really pouring out of the dam, that those fish could gain as much as a pound a month.
Wow!
Oh my gosh!
But they couldn't do it, obviously, for very long. I mean, that
How far below the dam did those mysis shrimp work?
They worked probably up to a couple miles.
Really?
Back at that point, when there was really a lot of mysis coming out. There's still times when there's good numbers of mysis coming out.
When do they usually come out? In the winter?
Higher flows. It seems like flows are typically it more than a season.
Mm-hmm. So spring?
Spring.
Because these mysis shrimp live in the bottom of the reservoir, correct?
Swim around in huge schools and swim around and get close to the outtake tubes,
and they
get sucked down.
So they swim around in big schools in the reservoir? Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen them on the screen or anything? Depth finders?
I've seen them, yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I feel like people don't use mysis shrimp below like the toilet bowl in the flats area anymore. It's just because of those, they don't get flushed out from the root eye?
I don't think there's the numbers that used to be in the lake that there, now that there was back then. So they're just not the huge numbers, yes.
Do you ever go up to the pan nowadays and just cringe with the number of people? And
I don't necessarily cringe, because you know what? They're all getting to enjoy the same thing, and they're coming from all over the world to do it. The frying pan is such a unique fishery in the fact that you can spend 3 or 4 hours in one pool,
right?
Because you don't have to move around a lot,
right?
That's the beauty of the pan, because so if you move in on top of somebody, Is that a rule breaker on the pan?
It's more acceptable on the pan than it is anywhere.
Right.
On most, and that's probably true of most tailwaters.
Because you can spend 2 hours in one hole.
That's right. Still, I never like to move in front of somebody unless I ask them.
Right.
You know,
it's just a code of ethics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll move behind them. You know.
Is there anything about the fishery you don't like? I mean, you're liking everything we ask you. I love this.
Oh, you know what? I wish it wasn't so private.
You're just, because the camera's rolling, that's why you're being extra nice.
No.
We turn them off and you go, God damn, people are so fucking proud of you.
No, not true at all.
You're good like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's just, we're fortunate to live in this valley and have all of the waters that we do. So, you know, and the people, you know, like I said, they come from all over. They read about the frying pan. They read about the Roaring Fork and the Colorado, and they want to come see it. And just like I did when, you know, and still do.
Sure.
You know, at different fisheries.
I love coming to Aspen in March. I'm not here all winter like you. I'm kind of over the snow. But that first week in March when I come in, Nikki will go up on Ajax and we'll make like 2 or 3 nonstops from top to bottom on the gondola, have a little taco and Basalt, and go fish all afternoon. March is an amazing time. There's nobody on the water, and you can go wherever you want. I just love fishing in March. And actually, I wrote an article for Tail Magazine called The COVID Time Machine, because during COVID, everything got shut down. People couldn't fly. This airport was empty. And I think I've said it before in the podcast, and I'll make it quicker, but we had a chance to go see the fork as I saw it back in 1960 when I was first learning how to fish. You could go anywhere. And then we got into the Keys, and there was nobody there the whole month of May. And the fishing was just incredible. And unfortunately, we're never going to see that again. They'll never shut the country down like that again.
No, they won't. And, you know, no question about it. Our sport that you and I got into when we were very young because we loved it so much, it had its advantages with not as many people. That's a given. I mean, it's, you know, you're never going to have less people on the flats in Florida. You're never going to have less people fishing these rivers.
You know, it's a great attitude to have because these are still the good old days. Even for us, old guys.
Absolutely.
They're still great.
Absolutely. And hopefully, you know, Nikki, when your son grows up and you're teaching him how to fly fish and stuff like that, you know, you're going to still think, man, back when, you know, Dad was around, you know, and doing these podcasts and stuff like that.
What do you mean I'm going to die?
You know, I never thought it'd be like that again.
I know.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Let's go back a little bit. You said you had a library of books upstairs in the Taylor Creek shop where you kept all your reading books because you don't have room in your RV now. And you mentioned Joe Brooks. Were you saltwater minded when you first began? How did you first get into fly fishing?
No, I first got into fly fishing and when I was young, fishing some of the bluegill and bass lakes on the farm ponds back in Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma is out first. I moved to Colorado. I was born in Denver, but moved away and then moved back in when I was a junior in high school. So I got into fly fishing heavily then, fishing the Big Thompson and stuff like that on the Front Range.
Was your dad a fly fisherman?
No, but he was a fisherman.
So how'd you get into the fly stuff? Just by chance.
Reading, you know, Outdoor Life and Sports Afield and
you mentioned Joe Brooks.
And
right?
Joe Brooks, exactly. He was some of the first books that I bought on fly fishing, and he was a hero, you know, because he traveled all over, not just saltwater fishing, but Argentina and, you know. You know, do you remember a guy by the name of Gadabout Gaddis?
Yeah.
That was also, you know, he had one of the first fishing shows on TV.
Yeah, absolutely.
And and he fished every way, but one of the things he liked the most was fly fishing. Well,
eventually you start fishing in the salt.
Yep.
Was Bill Fitzsimmons, is he the one that got you to Christmas Island?
Yes, the first time I went to Christmas Island.
That's the first bonefish or saltwater fish you ever caught and saw?
I'd fished for them in Mexico and stuff on vacations and stuff like that, and I'd caught a few prior to that.
Right.
But, yeah, that was my first introduction when I could spend a whole week chasing them.
And that was in the 80s? The first time you went to Christmas Island?
That was the early 90s.
Early 90s?
Yeah, it was like 91.
I caught my very first bonefish over there with Bill Fitzsimmons.
Oh, you did?
Your boss.
Wow.
I went over it on one of those trips.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I broke him off instantly. I hooked this bonefish, and he starts running, and I'm hanging on it. It throws like an overhand knot around something. My reel rudder breaks me off, and I go, oh, my God. And it was little. It was like, my God, that fish was so fast. It's crazy.
So was Bill Fitzsimmons one of the first people to bring people over there to Christmas Island?
From this valley, I think he did.
He definitely was from this valley. And I don't think a lot of people were going over there prior to that. I mean, there were certainly groups from, that were going over there, but from this valley, he took a lot of people from this valley over.
And then you started taking people by yourself to Las Roques and other locations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep, sure did.
Las Roques is a wonderful place. Well, let me ask you this, you became manager of the store. You would think that, sometimes your passion for fishing gets ruined by working in the business, running a store like that. Did it ever dement it at all or diffuse it, or was it ever a struggle that you're stuck in the store and you want to be fishing and...
Well, stuck in the store was like the next best thing to fishing because I got to talk fishing all the time. Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the things that I miss the most since I've retired is having that whole fishing environment of, especially, the guides and talking to the guides and seeing how their day went and what they were doing and how they were doing it and things like that. I still get that. I can still call them up and I can still say, I'm going to go out on a fork today, what's been happening, and they're more than willing to share. But that's probably the thing I miss the most. I love to talk fishing. I mean, right. I love to have somebody come back at the end of the day and say, man, where you told me to go and what you told me to throw as far as flies go, said it works great and I loved it. I had an incredible day.
I think everybody does that's in fishing and associated with a store, whether it be in Key West or the Taylor Creek shop that you used to manage. There's a pulse. There's a pulse around stores, and the conversation can go in so many different directions. And those type of people that have a heart for fishing, you don't find everywhere. So it's almost like these little locations where you just want to go and hang out. Like you might not even go fishing. Like, I'm not that guy, but I've become that guy, because it's like, do I really want to go fishing? No, I'd rather wait till later and fish only an hour. Like you said, I want to pick a certain little window and love it fully instead of spending a big part of the time there. But when I'm down valley, I want to go by the shop and just see what's going on. Just, maybe buy a couple bugs. I'm the worst. I can't buy 2 bugs. I got to buy 2 dozen. I'm the store's best client.
But it's the same thing in the Keys when we're driving down from, South Florida down to the Keys. You got to stop at Sandy's, and then we got to stop at 7 Mile, and then Nathaniel Shop, the angling company. You got to stop and just talk shop.
It's almost you got to piss on every hydrant on the way down.
Like a dog.
That's a good way. That's a good way to put it.
I'm back in town. Look at, we're gonna catch a ball.
Well, maybe you think that,
fuck
but
all you guys up. No, I'm just kidding. It's such a big life that we all have in fishing, and I guess a question that I'd like to answer sometimes myself is what's your favorite fish and what's your favorite situation in fishing?
Ooh.
After all the experience you've had traveling the world, designing flies, maybe designing your own fly to catch a fish that you can't catch the day before, and you go down with a new bug, and now you got them. What's your favorite scenario?
Well, certainly that's a scenario that I love a lot. That's a scenario with trout fishing is having difficult fish on light tippets or whatever that are hard to fool, and then you can go home and you can try to, you're thinking about it constantly, even when you're there and you can't catch them. You get a little closer, trying to look and see what those fish are eating or whatever, and you can design a fly, and you can come back the next day or the next week or whatever and catch a fish on a fly that you've tied like that. But as far as favorite fish, boy,
yeah,
that's a tough one. I mean, I love bonefish for sure. I love tarpon fishing. I haven't done a ton of it, but when I've done it, oh my gosh! Obviously you know just how much fun it is. And,
yeah,
and you know what? If the situation arises and I'm in a place, I love bluegill. I love to whatever those fish are.
Who sang the song? Date the one you're with. You remember the song? Love the one you're with. If you can't be the one you love the one you're with. Who was that? Steven Stills or somebody? It's the fish. Love the one you're with, because every situation is really enticing. It really is.
It is.
Earlier this summer, I was going down fishing just before dark. I'd get to my spot with 30 minutes left, and it was already quite dark. And there was no hatch, nothing. And then I was throwing big stimulators. And then right at the buzzer, right when they closed the drapes, boom, the bombs were going off. And you couldn't see your fly, but you were down there. And it was just like, I couldn't wait for the next night to come to get back down there. And this is after I started doing this in 1960. It's still a big time joy.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
What's your next challenge now? Where do you see yourself now?
Well, I'm at a point in my life where I'm at now, getting to fish Colorado and in the summer times and Mexico in the winter times. I'm just hoping to continue to have the good health that enables me to do that for many years to come.
Yeah.
I'd consider myself very fortunate to doing what I'm doing, and hopefully I get to continue to do it for a long time.
Do you still have a voice with the conservation organizations here, the Guide Alliance, Roaring Fork Conservancy?
The Guide Alliance, I've been an honorary board member since it started, pretty much. I was one of the founding people of it, and I actually, this past spring at our annual meeting, I said, listen, I've been a board member for a long time, but I'm not here very much anymore. And I said, why don't you give my board spot up? And they said, no, you're going to be an honorary board member for the rest of your life.
That's awesome.
That meant a lot to me as well.
Very cool.
What was your one? Another thing I'd like to know is, like, if you're really happy with what you're seeing, the fish are prolific, people are enjoying the sport, enjoying all the rivers, hatches are great. Is there anything you'd like to change with how you see it as it is today? In a perfect world.
In a perfect world, I'd like to see a high water mark rule.
Ooh,
interesting.
In a perfect world, I'd like to see everybody get to enjoy all of the rivers like you can in other states.
Interesting. I'd like that.
I was thinking about that the other day. And here's the ultimate situation that we're seeing across the country. Really wealthy men are owning all the great habitat for elk hunting, river access, Roaring Fork Valley. We can't fish where we used to be able to fish. We used to walk wherever we wanted to.
Yeah.
And I understand why, and I can understand both sides, but it's a shame that you cannot have access to great water. But you look on the other side. Okay, let's just say you buy a wonderful home, a great ranch, famous river, and all of a sudden you're close to the river. All of a sudden you have 6 guys fishing in your front yard.
I understand it as well. I do. But that doesn't mean that in a perfect world I wouldn't want it.
I think Tim's trying to say he doesn't have that massive ranch.
That's right.
With miles of river. So
I want to be a part of that ranch.
Okay, so I got a question for you. If you had one fly to fish in the Roaring Fork, what would it be?
Oh, boy.
But like the most reliable, you think, when you tie that fly on, it just gives you extreme confidence.
That's a hard question to answer because of the fact that it changes throughout the season so much. But, like it used to be on the Roaring Fork with a Western coachman way back in the day, I'd have to say probably a Prince Nymph.
Prince Nymph, yeah.
Georges Odier.
Yeah,
the swimming fly.
Exactly. That's right.
I miss those guys. They
Yeah,
they
me too.
were the guys who taught Chuck Fothergill. He taught me how to tie flies, and I worked for Georges Odier a little bit, guiding a little bit. It was interesting. Even though Chuck taught us how to tie flies, I was never on the water with him. So we were always trying to figure out how to do stuff on our own on the water.
Right.
But
You never fished with Chuck?
not that I remember. He never took us to the river because the Wright brothers and I and Craig Ward learned how to tie flies from Chuck. And he'd tell us how to do stuff, but he was always on his own. And we would tell him that we would catch a big fish. Where'd you catch your big fish? Where'd you go? He'd ask us. And then he'd say, okay, I'm going to really concentrate on those spots now. It's like, no, those are our spots.
Did you fish with him?
You know what? I fished with him I met him for the first time up on the Upper Colorado when I was fishing below Hot Sulphur Springs. And I fished with him just for an hour, perhaps. Because it was the same way. He came down and asked what I was using.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's
Were you
funny.
out fishing him?
Oh, I don't even remember.
But you know
what?
How about Steve Herder from Steamboat? Did you know him?
Oh, yeah. No, Steve.
He was a great fly tire.
Yes.
And he focused on midges and the midge hatches.
Yeah.
And he'd come fish the pan only for the midge hatch.
Yeah.
It was sacrilegious for him to fish anything else.
Yeah. Well, I still miss the fact that I don't get back here for that spring fishing that you were mentioning. Because the spring fishing on the lower river too, on the Roaring Fork in the Colorado, besides just up here and on the pan, with the mid has tremendous midge hatches. I mean, and big midges like 18s and even almost bigger than that. They're just huge, and the fish just gorge themselves.
Where
on
they're
it.
sticking their face out to eat them, and not just you'd see the little dorsal and tail.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And they're gulping and staying up on the surface for a long period of time, eating them one right after the other, rather than coming up and then going back down, and
Right.
that type of a thing.
I want to ask you about the pan one more time. Why are we not seeing those big rainbows that you guys, I mean, I never saw it, but, I hear stories back in the 80s and 90s of, the fish to catch was a really big rainbow trout on the pan. Now you're only catching 10 to 14-inch brown trout. Brown trout are everywhere.
Too many of them.
And they're eating all the minnows of the rainbows.
Well, there's just too many. There's too many fish, is what literally it is. And the Colorado Parks and Wildlife realizes that, and that's why they've allowed people now and even encourage people now to catch some of these small brown trout and take them out.
And there's no limit.
Well, there's a limit. I think
There is
there's
a
a
limit?
limit. Yeah, I think there's a limit of like 2 or 4, something like that. But we have a lot more fish.
Or I mean, is there a restriction on length?
Yes.
There is.
Has to be less than 14 inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
Do you take any?
no. And we've spent our whole life teaching catch and release.
Yeah.
And now when it benefits the fishery, we've taught everybody and we feel the same way, we don't take them.
Yeah, I would feel really weird.
I know,
to
wouldn't it? Whack one on the head.
To kill one out of the frying pan. I'd feel really weird, but if it benefits conservation and if it's going to enhance the river, that's probably what we should be doing.
We should be.
We'll just let other people do it.
That's probably it. That's what they're saying.
That's not a great mindset.
Well,
because everyone else is saying that too.
It's not a great mindset for, if you take a look at, the subject and what we're trying to do. But in my personal mind, I'm uncomfortable doing it myself. But I know there are a lot of people out there that will do it because it's available.
That's the same thing about voting. It's like, oh, I'm not going to vote because my vote doesn't count. I'll let all the other people vote.
No, but those guys are wrong because your vote does count.
Well, your fish that you catch, that you kill out of the frying pan counts too.
But there's so many people that like to take fish, so I'll just let them take them. If there was no one else that took fish.
I very rarely see people take fish out of the pan.
That's the problem. There's not very many people that want to kill a fish.
Oh, interesting. I thought a lot of spin fishermen might be up there trying to take some.
I was going to say, and the people that may want to take and kill those brown trout have a hard time catching them because they're using big old spinners.
Yeah.
And, that fishery is very technical.
That's right.
Well, let's go get some.
Let's
go get some.
Sorry, not me. I'm with you.
Nikki, are you in? Come on, dog.
If Tim's out, I'm out. But that's a very interesting subject.
But that's one of the reasons. Another reason is not the numbers of mysis shrimp that used to be up there.
That's how they got big.
That's another.
The protein.
But I believe it's more related to the fact that we have so many small brown trout.
What about all the pressure and the people on the flats where the rainbows spawn? Does that have any effect when people are walking back and forth the flats and walking over beds and reds? And
most likely. Probably has some
Should that
effect.
be shut off a certain time of year? Just let's just say hypothetically, you can't fish above the bend pool.
Hypothetically, probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
200-yard section
for a month or a month and a half. Hypothetically, that would be great.
Or do what they did in the Taylor, where they shut down the toilet bowl, and you can fish anywhere up to the toilet bowl. They have that string across the river where you can't cross. Have you fished the Taylor River?
I have, but I've not fished it up around the toilet bowl. I mean, my question is in the toilet bowl, is there spawning habitat?
That's a good
Not
question.
really.
I don't know.
No, because if there's not, then what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, it's a deep hole with water's racing
just
through
like it is here.
Yeah.
Similar to that. That's kind of what I thought.
You want to close the flats.
You need to close the spawning habitat.
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I know in the Taylor, that string across is pretty far down from where the water comes out of the reservoir. Mm-hmm. So there is
so maybe there is
two bends and then you'll have the dam. But that's a good question. Yeah. Who knows?
What would you like to add?
Well,
we covered a lot, but is there anything that you'd like us to have people remember you by?
Actually, other than the fact of that I've tried to help a lot of people and as well as the fish in the area around here, and have been very fortunate my whole life to be able to do that. And thank you for the incredible podcast that you guys put on all the time, and that's the conservation minded as well. And
well, thank you. Well, you've always done it with a smile on your face. And the gentleman who's running the shop now, Scott Spooner, I asked him last night, and he says, Tim's a legend around here because he's tough, fair, and kind-hearted.
That's a nice accolade.
It's good.
Very cool. Well, Tim, thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big
Thanks
time.
for having me.
Thank you. You've always been a wonderful friend and a great guy to hang with.
Sounds good. We'll run into each other in the shop, right?
Absolutely. Let's go fish that ditch.
All right.
Take a couple brown trout. See you, Tim.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys.
When I saw his first night story, when I saw it's just a